Let me read to you a passage from the 6th chapter of St. John's Gospel, verses 1 to 15. It's the Gospel for Friday of the second week of Eastertide, Year A. St. John writes, "After this, Jesus crossed the Sea of Galilee, which is that of Tiberias. A great multitude followed him, because they saw the miracles which he did for those who were sick. So Jesus went up a mountain, and there he sat with his disciples. Now the Pasch, the festival day of the Jews, was near at hand. When Jesus therefore looked up and saw a great multitude coming to him, he said to Philip, 'Whence shall we buy bread for these to eat?' This he said to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered, 200 denarii of bread would not be sufficient for each to have but a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, the brother of Simon Peter, said to him, 'There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what is that among so many?' Then Jesus said, 'Make the men sit down.' There was a lot of grass there, so about 5,000 men sat down. Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, had them distributed to those who were seated. He did the same with the fish, as much as they wanted. When all were satisfied, he said to his disciples, 'Gather up the fragments that remain, lest they be lost.' So they gathered up everything and filled 12 baskets with the remains from the 5 barley loaves. Now when they saw the miracle Jesus had worked, the people said, 'Truly, this is the prophet who was to come into the world.' Jesus, seeing that they would come to take him by force and make him king, withdrew again to the mountain to be by himself alone." That's from John chapter 6, verses 1 to 15. And what does it suggest to us? Well, I have often thought that we have become so accustomed to the accounts of the miracles of Jesus that we scarcely advert to the marvel of them. The fact is that there has been no one in the history of the world who has displayed such miraculous power over nature as has Jesus Christ. The working of miracles was not characteristic of the prophets in general, even though some prophets did work some miracles, such as Elisha. The greatest of them, John the Baptist, worked none. Yet in the case of Jesus of Nazareth, the number and range of his miracles were simply astounding. He cured people of all kinds of sickness. He raised people of various ages from the dead. He calmed storms. He walked on the seas. He cast out demons from the possessed. As he was being arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, he silently and without moving threw back his opponents before freely submitting to their force. Nobody in the history of mankind has shown such power over nature as has he. Jesus Christ is a man of power, but a power not only far more exalted than the power of the great ones of this world, but a power manifesting holiness and mercy. St. Thomas Aquinas once wrote that God shows his power in acts of mercy, and this is exactly the character of the power of Christ. As man, he shows himself to be all-powerful, but his power is purely in a holy service of those in need. Well then, let us turn to our gospel text today. It begins with a reference to the great multitude of people who followed him because of his healings of those who were sick. He went up the mountain as if manifesting his nearness to God, indeed, as if about to do what God could do. The vast concourse of people have no food, and with a handful of bread and a little fish, he proceeds effortlessly to feed the multitude to their heart's content. He is powerful. He is compassionate. He is merciful. He is all holy and good. His miracle, once again, reveals the greatness and the excellence of his person. There is a detail in John's account of this amazing miracle. It is his mention of the liturgical season during which this occurred. It was near the time of the Pasch. In telling us that this miracle of the feeding of the multitudes took place near the time of the Pasch, we can assume that John is meaning to remind us of the great Pasch, when our Lord would take bread again and bless it and distribute it to his disciples, but this time not as mere bread, but as his very own body. St. John is meaning to point out that this miracle of the feeding of the multitude with bread, so like the feeding of God's people in the wilderness with manna from heaven, was a sign of the Eucharist to come. It pointed back to the miracle of the manna from heaven, and it pointed forward to the miracle of the bread from heaven, which is Jesus Christ himself. Indeed, the account of this miracle of the loaves and fishes is, we might say, the introduction to the long discourse of our Lord on the Holy Eucharist contained in this very chapter 6 of St. John's Gospel. The other three Gospels narrate the institution of the Eucharist during their accounts of the Last Supper, the Holy Pasch, on the night before our Lord endured his passion. St. John alludes to this Pasch in our passage today, but he himself gives our Lord's clear and copious teaching on the Eucharist during this chapter containing his account of the miracle of the loaves. The true bread come down from heaven is not the mere manna given to their fathers in the desert. It is not the mere loaves and fishes he himself distributed to them on this occasion. He himself is the true bread from heaven, which they must all eat, not symbolically, but in very truth. His flesh is real food, he would tell them, and his blood is real drink. This would be the greatest miracle of all, and would outclass all others in its gift of mercy, for it would involve the gift not only of physical health and life, but the gift of himself, the gift of Jesus Christ, the gift of him in whom resides every heavenly blessing, as St. Paul would say. Jesus Christ is the man of history, the man on whom each person can totally rely, the one in whom we can place our entire trust. He lives now in all his human and divine reality, and he is our salvation. He is all-powerful, and his power reveals his love and his mercy. His greatest and most powerful act is the Holy Eucharist, when he changes the bread and wine into his body and blood, and gives himself to his disciples. Let us place our trust in him, our faith in him, and live according to his word.